I was sitting in my favorite armchair, sipping a glass of white wine, when my best friend Sarah called. "Hey girl, how's it going?" she chirped. I couldn't help but smile. Sarah always had this infectious energy that brightened up even the dullest days. "Oh, same old," I replied, taking another sip. "Andrew's out of town on another business trip, so I'm enjoying some me time." "Lucky you," Sarah laughed. "I swear, sometimes I envy your life." "Melissa, you've got it all figured out." I chuckled, feeling a warm glow of pride. "Well, I don't know about that, but things are pretty good, I have to admit." As I chatted with Sarah, I couldn't help but reflect on how fortunate I felt. At 38, I had a successful career as an accountant, a beautiful home, and a loving husband. Andrew and I had been married for 15 years, and while we had our ups and downs like any couple, I truly believed we were rock solid. "So, what's new with you?" I asked Sarah, settling deeper into my chair. "Oh, you know me, still single and ready to mingle," she joked. "But seriously, I've been thinking about changing jobs. The corporate world is starting to wear me down." "I get that," I said sympathetically. "It can be tough, but you're brilliant, Sarah. You'll figure it out." We chatted for a while longer, gossiping about mutual friends and sharing funny stories from work. As we talked, I found myself feeling grateful for our friendship. Sarah had been there for me through thick and thin, and I knew I could always count on her. After we hung up, I decided to surprise Andrew with a home-cooked meal for when he returned from his trip. I headed to the kitchen and started pulling out ingredients for his favorite dish, lasagna. As I layered the pasta and sauce, humming along to the radio, "Iki mai," I thought about how lucky I was to have found such a wonderful partner in Andrew. He was ambitious and hardworking, but also kind and supportive. Just last week, he had surprised me with tickets to a Broadway show I'd been dying to see. I was so lost in my thoughts that I almost didn't hear my phone ping with a new message. It was from Andrew. "Flight delayed, won't be home until late, don't wait up." I felt a twinge of disappointment but pushed it aside. That was the nature of his job, after all. I wrapped up the lasagna and put it in the fridge for tomorrow. As I climbed into bed that night, I thought about how some of my friends complained about their marriages growing stale or their husbands becoming distant. I felt truly blessed that Andrew and I still had such a strong connection after all these years. Little did I know that my perfect world was about to come crashing down around me. But in that moment, as I drifted off to sleep, I was content in the knowledge that I had a loving husband, a fulfilling career, and a life that many would envy. If only I had known then what I know now. But isn't that always the way? We're often blind to the cracks in our own foundations until the whole structure comes tumbling down. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That night, I slept peacefully, blissfully unaware of the storm that was brewing on the horizon. Sometimes, I think back to that version of myself, so trusting, so naive, and I want to shake her, to warn her. But then again, maybe it's better that I didn't know. Maybe that innocence was a gift, in its own way. Because the truth is, sometimes you have to lose everything to find out who you really are. And let me tell you, friend, the journey I was about to embark on would test me in ways I never imagined. But it would also lead me to a strength I never knew I had. I woke up the next morning feeling refreshed and ready to tackle the day. Andrew was due back from his trip, and I was excited to see him. As I got ready for work, I noticed his suitcase in the hallway. He must have come in late last night while I was asleep. I headed to the kitchen, expecting to find him sipping his morning coffee, but the room was empty. That's when I heard the shower running upstairs. I smiled to myself, thinking I'd surprise him with breakfast. As I was scrambling some eggs, I heard his phone buzz on the kitchen counter. I glanced over, not intending to snoop, but the name on the screen caught my eye. Sarah from marketing. I frowned, trying to remember if Andrew had ever mentioned a Sarah from his office. Just then, Andrew walked in, his hair still damp from the shower. "Morning, honey," he said, giving me a quick peck on the cheek. "Oh, breakfast, you're the best." I handed him a plate, trying to keep my voice casual. "How was your trip?" Same old, he replied, not meeting my eyes. "Lots of meetings, boring dinners with clients. You know how it is." I nodded, watching him closely. Was it my imagination, or did he seem a bit off? "Your phone buzzed earlier," I said. "Someone named Sarah from marketing?" Andrew's hand froze halfway to his mouth. For a split second, I saw something flash across his face. Panic. Guilt. But it was gone so quickly, I almost thought I'd imagined it. "Oh, right," he said, his voice perfectly normal. "New client we're trying to land. She probably wants to schedule a follow-up meeting." I nodded, feeling silly for even noticing. Of course, it was work-related. What else could it be? The rest of the week passed uneventfully. Andrew seemed to be working longer hours, often coming home after I'd gone to bed. But that wasn't unusual during busy periods at his firm. It wasn't until Friday night that I felt that nagging sense of unease again. We were supposed to have dinner with friends, but Andrew called at the last minute to say he had to work late. "I'm so sorry, honey," he said, sounding genuinely apologetic. "This project is kicking my ass." "Rain check?" I agreed, trying not to sound disappointed. As I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on, just a vague sense of discomfort. I decided to surprise Andrew at his office with some takeout. He'd been working so hard lately, I thought it would be a nice gesture. When I arrived at his building, the security guard greeted me with a smile. "Evening, Mrs. Collins. Haven't seen you in a while." I chatted with him for a few minutes before heading up to Andrew's floor. As I stepped out of the elevator, I was surprised to find the office dark and empty. Maybe Andrew was working in a conference room. I walked around, peering into rooms, but there was no sign of him. Confused, I pulled out my phone to call him when I heard voices coming from the break room. "Can't keep doing this, Andrew," a woman's voice said. "It's not fair to her." My heart started racing. I inched closer to the door, straining to hear. I know, Andrew's voice replied, sounding tired. "It's complicated. You know that." "Is it?" the woman challenged. "Because from where I'm standing, it's pretty simple. You need to make a choice." I felt like I couldn't breathe. What was going on? Who was this woman? And what choice did Andrew need to make? Before I could hear more, I heard footsteps approaching. Panicking, I ducked into a nearby office, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they'd hear it. I watched through the crack in the door as Andrew and a tall blonde woman I'd never seen before walked past. They weren't touching, but there was an intimacy in the way they moved together that made my stomach churn. As soon as they were gone, I fled the building, the takeout forgotten in my haste. My mind was reeling. What had I just witnessed? Was Andrew? No, I couldn't even bring myself to think it. When I got home, I poured myself a large glass of wine. Trying to calm my nerves, I told myself I was overreacting. There could be a perfectly innocent explanation for what I'd heard. Maybe it was about a difficult client or a workplace issue I didn't know about. But as I sat there in the darkening room, waiting for Andrew to come home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. The comfortable certainty I'd always had about our relationship felt suddenly fragile, like a soap bubble ready to burst at the slightest touch. When Andrew finally came home, hours later, I pretended to be asleep. I listened to him moving around the room, getting ready for bed, and I wondered, who was this man I'd been married to for 15 years? And more importantly, what wasn't he telling me? As I lay there in the dark, my mind racing with possibilities, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront Andrew, not yet, but I would pay closer attention. Because if there was something going on, I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be filled with more twists and turns than I could have ever imagined. But in that moment, as I lay next to the man I thought I knew better than anyone in the world, I felt the first cracks forming in the foundation of my perfect life. The next few weeks were a blur of anxiety and doubt. I found myself watching Andrew like a hawk, analyzing his every move, every word. It was exhausting, but I couldn't help myself. The memory of that overheard conversation at his office haunted me. One morning, as we were getting ready for work, I noticed Andrew checking his phone more frequently than usual. He kept angling the screen away from me, which sent my suspicions into overdrive. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Oh, yeah," he replied, not looking up from his phone. "Just a busy day ahead." I nodded, biting my tongue to keep from pressing further. As I watched him hurry out the door, I felt a knot forming in my stomach. This wasn't like him. Or was it? Had I just never noticed before? That evening, I decided to broach the subject of his increased workload. "You've been working so much lately," I said as we ate dinner. "Is everything all right at the office?" Andrew paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Yeah, just, you know how it is, big client, lots of pressure." I nodded, watching him closely. "That's Sarah from marketing. Is she new? I don't remember you mentioning her before." For a split second, I saw that same flash of something cross his face, but then it was gone, replaced by a casual smile. "Oh, yeah, she joined the team a few months ago. Smart kid. Good at her job." I tried to ignore the way my heart clenched at the word kid. Was I being paranoid, or did Andrew sound a little too enthusiastic about this Sarah? As the days passed, I found myself growing more and more suspicious. Andrew's late nights at the office became more frequent. He started taking calls in another room, his voice low and hushed. And then there were the mysterious texts that would make him smile at his phone, only to quickly put it away when he noticed me looking. One night, as we lay in bed, I decided to test the waters. "Hey, I was thinking," I said, turning to face him. "Maybe we could take a vacation soon, just the two of us, like we used to." Andrew's response was less than enthusiastic. "Oh, I don't know, honey. Work's pretty crazy right now. Maybe in a few months." I felt my heart sink. A few months? We used to jump at any chance to spend time together. When had that changed? The next day, I found myself sitting at my desk at work, unable to concentrate. My mind kept replaying every suspicious moment, every odd behavior I'd noticed in the past few weeks. Was I losing my mind, or was there really something going on? I picked up my phone, hesitating for a moment before dialing Sarah's number. "Hey," I said when she answered. "I need to talk to you about something." An hour later, we were sitting in a quiet cafe near my office. Sarah listened patiently as I poured out all my fears and suspicions. "I know it sounds crazy," I finished, feeling embarrassed. "Maybe I'm just being paranoid." Sarah reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Honey, you're not crazy, and you're definitely not paranoid. Something's going on, and you need to trust your gut." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It wasn't just in my head. Someone else could see it too. "What should I do?" I asked, feeling lost. Sarah's eyes hardened. "You need to find out the truth, whatever it takes." As I left the cafe, I felt a mix of emotions swirling inside me. Fear, anger, determination. I didn't want to believe that Andrew could be cheating on me. We'd been through so much together, built a life, made plans for the future. How could he throw all that away? But the more I thought about it, the more things started to add up. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the emotional distance that had been growing between us. It was like looking at a puzzle and suddenly realizing you had all the pieces in front of you. That night, as I lay in bed listening to Andrew's steady breathing beside me, I made a decision. I was going to get to the bottom of this, one way or another. If Andrew was cheating, I needed to know. And if he wasn't, well, then I needed to know that too. so I could put these fears to rest and we could work on rebuilding the trust that had been damaged. I turned over, studying Andrew's face in the dim light. He looked so peaceful, so familiar. How could this man, who I'd shared my life with for so long, be hiding such a huge secret from me? As I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of a precipice. Whatever I discovered in the coming days would change everything. But I was ready. I had to be. Because the alternative, living in this state of constant doubt and fear, was no longer an option. Little did I know, the journey I was about to embark on would test me in ways I never imagined. It would push me to my limits, force me to question everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and myself. But in the end, it would also lead me to a strength I never knew I possessed. As I fell asleep that night, one thought kept echoing in my mind. The truth will set you free. I just hoped I was ready for whatever that truth might be. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of determination I hadn't felt in weeks. I'd spent too long wondering and worrying. It was time to take action. As I got ready for work, I watched Andrew rush through his morning routine. He seemed distracted, checking his phone every few minutes. "Big day?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Oh yeah, important client meeting," he mumbled, not looking up from his phone. I nodded, biting my tongue. There was a time when he would have shared details about his work, asked for my opinion. Now, it felt like we were living parallel lives. After Andrew left, I sat at the kitchen table, my mind racing. How could I find out what was really going on? I thought about hiring a private investigator, but the idea made me uncomfortable. This was my husband, after all. Shouldn't I be able to figure this out on my own? That's when I remembered something. A few years ago, Andrew had set up our phones to share locations, for safety reasons. We'd never really used it, but maybe... I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking slightly as I navigated to the app. There it was, a little blue dot showing Andrew's location. Right now, it showed him at his office. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Throughout the day, I found myself constantly checking the app. The blue dot stayed at his office, which should have been reassuring, but instead, it just made me more anxious. What if he was just being careful? Around 6 p.m., I saw the dot start to move. My heart raced as I watched it travel across the city. To my surprise and relief, it headed straight home. When Andrew walked in the door, I was sitting on the couch trying to look casual. "Hey, honey," he said, giving me a quick kiss. "How was your day?" I studied his face, looking for any signs of guilt or deception, but he just looked tired. "Fine," I replied. "Yours?" He shrugged. "Long, I'm beat." As he headed upstairs to change, I felt a mixture of relief and frustration. He seemed normal, but then again, what did normal even mean anymore? The next day, I decided to dig deeper. While Andrew was in the shower, I quickly checked his phone. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through his messages, but I found nothing suspicious. Just work emails and texts from friends I knew. I put the phone down, feeling guilty but also slightly relieved. Maybe I was overreacting after all. But then, as I was about to leave for work, I noticed something odd. Andrew's briefcase was open on the kitchen table, and inside was a stack of papers I'd never seen before. Curiosity got the better of me, and I quickly flipped through them. My heart nearly stopped when I saw it. A lease agreement for an apartment across town, an apartment I'd never heard of, in Andrew's name. I quickly snapped a photo of the document with my phone, my mind reeling. What was this? Why would Andrew need another apartment? All day at work, I couldn't concentrate. The image of that lease agreement kept flashing in my mind. I thought about confronting Andrew right away, but something held me back. I needed more information. That evening, I made an excuse about working late and drove to the address on the lease. It was a nice building in a trendy part of town. As I sat in my car across the street, I felt like I was in some kind of surreal movie. Was this really my life? After about an hour, just as I was about to give up, I saw him, Andrew, walking into the building like he belonged there. My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. I waited another hour, but he didn't come out. Finally, feeling numb, I drove home. Andrew was already there when I arrived, working on his laptop in the living room. He looked up and smiled when I walked in. "Hey, honey, late night." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. How could he sit there, acting so normal, when my whole world was crumbling around me? That night, as we lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I had proof now that Andrew was hiding something big from me. But what exactly? An affair? A secret family? The possibilities seemed endless, and each one more painful than the last. I turned to look at Andrew, sleeping peacefully beside me. In that moment, I felt more alone than I ever had in my life. The man I thought I knew better than anyone in the world had become a stranger. As I lay there, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront Andrew yet. I needed more information, more proof, because if I was going to blow up my entire life, I damn well wanted to be sure. Little did I know, the journey I was embarking on would test me in ways I never imagined. It would push me to my limits, force me to question everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and myself. But in that moment, as I lay awake in the dark, all I knew was that nothing would ever be the same again. The life I thought I had, the marriage I believed in, it was all built on sand. And now the tide was coming in. The next few weeks were a blur of anxiety and covert investigations. I felt like I was living a double life, playing the role of the happy wife while secretly trying to uncover my husband's deception. I started by digging deeper into the mysterious apartment. One afternoon, while Andrew was at work, I drove back to the building. My heart was pounding as I approached the front desk. "Hi," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm here to see Andrew Collins." The doorman eyed me suspiciously. "And you are?" I took a deep breath. "His wife." For a moment, I thought he was going to turn me away, but then he shrugged and buzzed me up. Apartment 507. As I rode the elevator, I tried to prepare myself for what I might find, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality. The apartment was nice, tastefully furnished, with a view of the city. But what struck me most was how lived in it felt. There were dishes in the sink, books on the coffee table, and on the mantle, a framed photo of Andrew with a woman I didn't recognize. I felt like I was going to be sick. I quickly snapped some photos with my phone and left, my mind reeling. Back at home, I pored over the evidence I'd gathered. The lease agreement, the photos of the apartment. It all pointed to one conclusion, but I still couldn't bring myself to believe it. That night, when Andrew came home, I watched him closely. He seemed normal, tired from work, but affectionate. He kissed me hello and asked about my day. How could he act so natural if he was hiding such a massive secret? Over the next few days, I found myself second-guessing everything. Maybe there was an innocent explanation for the apartment. Maybe it was for a relative or a friend in need. I felt like I was going crazy, constantly swinging between suspicion and self-doubt. I decided to confide in my friend Sarah again. We met for coffee, and I spilled everything: the apartment, the photo, my conflicting emotions. Sarah listened patiently, her face growing more concerned with each detail. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Honey, I hate to say this, but it doesn't look good." I nodded, feeling tears prick at my eyes. "I know, but what if I'm wrong? What if there's an explanation and I'm just jumping to conclusions?" Sarah sighed. "There's only one way to know for sure. You need to confront him." The idea filled me with dread, but I knew she was right. That night, I resolved to talk to Andrew, but when he came home, looking tired and stressed, I lost my nerve. "How was your day?" I asked instead, hating myself for my cowardice. "Long," he replied, giving me a distracted smile. "I've got a big presentation tomorrow. I might have to work late. I nodded, feeling that familiar twist in my gut. Another late night, another opportunity for whatever was going on. The next day, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I told my boss I wasn't feeling well and left work early. Then I parked my car near Andrew's office and waited. Hours passed. The sun set, and still, no sign of Andrew. Just as I was about to give up, I saw him exit the building, but he wasn't alone. The woman from the photo was with him. My heart raced as I watched them walk down the street together. They weren't holding hands or being overtly affectionate, but there was an intimacy in the way they moved, the way they leaned in close to talk. I followed them at a distance, feeling like a character in a bad spy movie. They went to a restaurant, sat at a corner table. Through the window, I could see them laughing, talking animatedly. After dinner, they walked back towards the apartment building I'd visited earlier. I watched, my heart breaking, as they entered together. I sat in my car for a long time after they disappeared inside, trying to process what I'd seen. It wasn't definitive proof of an affair, but it was close, too close for comfort. When I finally drove home, I felt numb. Andrew wasn't there. Of course he wasn't. He was with her. I poured myself a large glass of wine and sat in the dark, my mind racing. What should I do now? Confront him? Leave? Pretend I never saw anything? As I sat there, I realized something. Despite all the evidence, despite what I'd seen with my own eyes, a part of me still didn't want to believe it. A part of me was still desperately clinging to the life I thought I had, the marriage I believed in. And that's when it hit me, the most painful realization of all. The problem wasn't just Andrew's potential infidelity. It was the fact that our entire relationship, the foundation of my life for the past 15 years, might be built on a lie. I went to bed that night feeling more lost and alone than ever. But as I drifted off to sleep, a small spark of determination flickered to life inside me. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I deserved the truth, and I was going to get it, no matter what it took. Little did I know, the journey ahead would be even more challenging than I imagined. But it would also lead me to discover a strength within myself that I never knew existed. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and a renewed sense of determination. I couldn't keep living like this, trapped in a limbo of suspicion and doubt. It was time to take more decisive action. I called in sick to work, my mind racing with possibilities. As I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee, an idea struck me. If Andrew could have secrets, so could I. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I never thought I'd use. "Hello?" I said when a gruff voice answered. "I need to hire a private investigator." An hour later, I was sitting across from a man named Mike in a dingy office downtown. He listened impassively as I poured out my story, only occasionally jotting down notes. "So, what exactly do you want me to do?" he asked when I finished. I took a deep breath. "I need to know everything. Where he goes, who he meets, what he does when he's not with me. And I need concrete evidence." Mike nodded, his expression unreadable. "It won't be cheap," he warned. "I don't care," I replied, surprising myself with my vehemence. "I need to know the truth." As I left Mike's office, I felt a mix of relief and guilt. Was I really doing this? Hiring someone to spy on my own husband. But then I remembered the apartment, the mysterious woman, all the lies and secrets. I squared my shoulders. Yes, I was doing this. Over the next few days, I tried to act normal around Andrew. It was harder than I expected. Every time he smiled at me or touched me, I felt a surge of anger and betrayal. How could he be so loving one moment and so deceitful the next? A week after hiring Mike, I received my first report. It was mostly mundane stuff, Andrew's daily routine, his work schedule. But there was one detail that caught my eye. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Andrew left work early and went to a gym across town. The thing was, Andrew had always claimed to hate gyms. He preferred running in the park or playing tennis. Why would he suddenly start going to a gym, and why hadn't he mentioned it to me? I decided to do some investigating of my own. The next Tuesday, I followed Andrew to the gym. I waited outside, my heart pounding, until I saw him leave 2 hours later. He looked different, more relaxed, almost glowing. As he walked to his car, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A woman had exited the gym just after him, the same woman I'd seen him with before. They didn't leave together, but the timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. I drove home in a daze, my mind spinning. What was going on at that gym? Was it just a cover for their meetings? When Andrew came home that night, I studied him closely. "How was your day?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Oh, same old," he replied, not meeting my eyes. "Lots of meetings, paperwork, nothing exciting." I nodded, feeling a fresh wave of anger wash over me. Another lie. How many more were there? The next day, I decided to take things a step further. While Andrew was at work, I went to the gym myself. I approached the front desk, putting on my best friendly smile. "Hi," I said to the receptionist. "I'm thinking of joining, but I was wondering if you could tell me about your couples classes. My husband and I are looking to get fit together." The receptionist looked confused. "I'm sorry, but we don't offer any couples classes here. We're mainly a personal training facility." I felt my heart sink. "Oh, that's odd. My husband comes here regularly." "Andrew Collins?" I thought for sure he mentioned couples classes. The receptionist's face changed at the mention of Andrew's name. "Oh, Mr. Collins. Yes, he comes in for personal training sessions twice a week, but he's never mentioned a wife." I thanked her and left quickly, feeling like I might be sick. Personal training sessions. Is that what they were calling it now? When I got home, I found an email from Mike waiting for me. He had more information, including some photos. With shaking hands, I opened the attachment. There were several pictures of Andrew and the mystery woman together. Entering the apartment building, having dinner at a restaurant, even one of them holding hands in a park. But it was the last photo that really got to me. It showed Andrew kissing the woman goodbye outside the gym. I stared at the photo for a long time, a strange calm settling over me. This was it, the proof I'd been looking for. There was no more room for doubt, no more excuses I could make for him. As I sat there, looking at the evidence of my husband's betrayal, I felt something shift inside me. The pain and confusion of the past weeks began to harden into something else. Determination, anger, a fierce desire for justice. I may have been blind before, but my eyes were wide open now, and I was done being the victim in this story. It was time to take control, to fight back. Andrew had no idea what was coming, but he was about to find out. Little did I know, the path ahead would be even more challenging than I imagined. But it would also lead me to discover a strength within myself that I never knew existed. The game was about to change, and I was ready to play. Armed with the damning evidence from Mike, I felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and oddly, a sense of relief. At least now, I knew the truth. But knowing and deciding what to do with that knowledge were two very different things. I spent the next few days in a daze, going through the motions of my daily life while my mind raced with possibilities. Should I confront Andrew immediately? Should I gather more evidence? Or should I just pack my bags and leave? One evening, as I sat at my desk pretending to work, an email notification popped up. It was from an address I didn't recognize. Curious, I opened it. My heart nearly stopped when I saw the contents. It was a series of photos of me following Andrew, me talking to the private investigator, me outside the gym. The message was simple: back off or else. I felt a chill run down my spine. Someone was watching me, but who? Andrew, the other woman, or someone else entirely? Panic rising in my throat, I called Sarah. "I need to see you." I said, my voice shaking. Now. An hour later, we were sitting in a quiet corner of a cafe across town. I showed Sarah the email, watching her face grow pale as she scrolled through the photos. "Oh my God, Melissa," she whispered. "This is serious. Have you told the police?" I shook my head. "And say what? That my cheating husband might be stalking me. They'd laugh me out of the station." Sarah reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "What are you going to do?" I took a deep breath. I threw myself into the investigation with a fervor that surprised even me. While Mike worked on tracing the email, I started my own digging. I combed through our financial records, looking for any discrepancies. And boy, did I find them. Large withdrawals from our joint account, credit card charges at hotels and restaurants I'd never been to. It was like looking at the financial records of a stranger. But the real bombshell came when I stumbled across a bank statement for an account I didn't know existed. An account in Andrew's name only, with a balance that made my head spin. Where had all this money come from? And more importantly, where was it going? I was so engrossed in my investigation that I almost missed the call from Mike. "I've got something," he said. "Can you come to the office?" 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from him, my heart pounding. "Well?" I demanded. "What did you find?" Mike slid a folder across the desk. "The email came from a computer at your husband's office. But here's the kicker. It wasn't sent from his computer. It was sent from one registered to a Sarah Peterson." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Sarah Peterson, the woman from the photos, Andrews, whatever she was. "There's more," Mike continued. "I did some digging on this Sarah. She's not just some random woman. She's the daughter of one of your husband's biggest clients." My mind was reeling. This wasn't just an affair. This was... what? A business deal? A merger sealed with sex? As I left Mike's office, my head spinning with this new information, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The pieces were starting to fall into place. The secret apartment, the mysterious bank account, the threatening email. It was all connected. That night, as I lay in bed next to Andrew, listening to his steady breathing, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront him. Not yet. I needed more information, more evidence, and I knew just how to get it. The next morning, I kissed Andrew goodbye as he left for work, playing the role of the loving wife one last time. As soon as he was gone, I sprang into action. I packed a small bag with clothes and essentials. Then I made a call to a locksmith I'd researched, scheduling them to come change the locks later that day. Finally, I transferred half of our joint savings into a new account in my name only. As I stood in our bedroom, looking around at the life we'd built together, I felt a pang of sadness. But it was quickly replaced by determination. Andrew had made his choice. Now it was time for me to make mine. I grabbed my bag and headed out the door, my mind already racing with plans. I had a lot of work to do, evidence to gather, people to talk to, truths to uncover. Andrew thought he was so clever, juggling his double life, but he had no idea who he was dealing with. I was done being the clueless wife. It was time to show him, and the world, exactly what I was capable of. As I drove away from our house, I felt a mix of fear and excitement. I didn't know exactly what lay ahead, but I knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. And honestly, I was okay with that. I spent the next few days in a cheap motel planning my next move. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from Andrew, ranging from confused to angry to pleading. I ignored them all. He'd had his chance to be honest. Now it was my turn to control the narrative. On the third day, I decided it was time. I texted Andrew, "Meet me at the cafe on 5th Street at 2 p.m. Come alone." I arrived early, choosing a table in the back corner where I could see the entire cafe. My heart was pounding, but I felt strangely calm. I'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in my head. At exactly 2 p.m., Andrew walked in. He looked terrible, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes. Good, I thought. Let him suffer a little. "Melissa," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "What's going on? Where have you been?" I looked at him, really looked at him, for what felt like the first time in years. This man, who I'd loved and trusted, who I'd built a life with, how had we ended up here? "I know everything, Andrew," I said quietly. He blinked, confusion crossing his face. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out a folder and placed it on the table between us. The apartment, the secret bank account, Sarah Peterson. Andrew's face drained of color. "Mel, I can explain." "Save it," I cut him off. "I'm not interested in your excuses. I want the truth, all of it, now." For a moment, he looked like he might try to deny it again, but then his shoulders slumped in defeat. "How did you find out?" he asked. "That's not important," I replied. "What's important is that you start talking from the beginning." And so he did. He told me about meeting Sarah at a company event 3 years ago, how it started as harmless flirting, then evolved into something more. The apartment was her idea, a place where they could be together without raising suspicion. But it's not just about the affair, is it?" I pressed. "What about the money, Andrew? Where did it come from?" He hesitated, then sighed. "Sarah's father, he's not just a client. He's been funneling money through our company, illegal stuff. The account you found, that's my cut." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. This was worse than I'd imagined. Not just infidelity, but fraud too. "How much?" I whispered. Andrew wouldn't meet my eyes. Millions," he admitted. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his confession hanging between us. Finally, I spoke. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice steady. "You're going to confess everything, the affair, the fraud, all of it, to the authorities. You're going to make it right." Andrew's head snapped up. "Are you insane? I'll go to prison." "Maybe," I agreed. But it's better than the alternative." "Which is?" I slid another folder across the table. "This contains copies of all the evidence I've gathered. Bank statements, emails, photos, everything. If you don't turn yourself in, I'll take it to the police myself. And trust me, it'll be much worse coming from me." Andrew's face crumpled. "Mel, please. We can work this out. We can start over." I felt a flicker of pity, quickly extinguished by anger. There is no weech anymore, Andrew. You made sure of that. "What about our life together?" he pleaded. 15 years of marriage. Doesn't that mean anything? I looked at him, really looked at him. The man I'd loved, the life we'd built. It all seemed like a distant dream now. "It meant everything," I said softly, "until you threw it all away." Andrew buried his face in his hands. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice muffled. "I want you to make this right," I replied. "Turn yourself in. Confess everything. It's the only way." He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed. "And if I do, what then?" I stood up, gathering my things. "Then maybe, just maybe, you can start to make amends. Not to me, that ship has sailed, but to yourself, to the man I thought you were." As I turned to leave, Andrew caught my arm. "Mel, wait, I'm sorry. For everything." I looked down at him. This broken man who had once been my whole world. "I know," I said quietly. "But sometimes, sorry isn't enough." With that, I walked out of the cafe, leaving Andrew and our life together behind. As I stepped out into the sunlight, I felt a strange mix of emotions, sadness for what I'd lost, anger at the betrayal, but also relief. The truth was finally out. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if Andrew would do the right thing or if I'd have to follow through on my threat. But I did know one thing. I was stronger than I'd ever given myself credit for. And whatever came next, I was ready to face it head on. As I walked down the street, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "We need to talk," it read. I smiled grimly. Round 2 was about to begin, but this time, I was ready. Let the games begin. After my confrontation with Andrew, I felt empty, like I'd been hollowed out, all my emotions spent. I wandered the streets for hours, not sure where to go or what to do next. Everything I'd known, everything I'd believed in, had crumbled around me. When I finally made it back to my motel room, I collapsed on the bed, exhaustion washing over me. But sleep wouldn't come. Instead, my mind raced, replaying every moment of my marriage, searching for signs I might have missed. Had there been clues all along? Had I been willfully blind? Or was Andrew just that good at deception? As the first rays of dawn crept through the dingy curtains, I finally drifted into a fitful sleep. When I woke, it was mid-afternoon, and I felt different. The numbness had given way to something else, something darker. I reached for my phone, half expecting to see a flood of messages from Andrew. But there was nothing. Just that one text from Sarah, still unanswered. A wave of anger washed over me. How dare they? How dare they destroy my life and then just disappear? I spent the next few days in a haze of fury and self-pity. I barely ate, barely slept. I ignored calls from work, from friends. The only person I talked to was Sarah. My friend Sarah, not the other one. She tried to coax me out of my room, but I refused. I just need time, I told her. But the truth was, I didn't know what I needed. I felt lost, adrift in a world I no longer recognized. One night, about a week after the confrontation, I found myself staring at the bottom of an empty wine bottle. In my drunken haze, I did something I'd promised myself I wouldn't do. I called Andrew. He answered on the first ring. "Mel, are you okay?" His voice, once so familiar and comforting, now sent a shudder of revulsion through me. "Am I okay?" I laughed bitterly. "What do you think, Andrew? You destroyed our life together. You lied to me for years. You made me doubt everything I thought I knew about us. So no, I'm not okay." There was a long pause. Then, "I'm sorry, Mel. I know it doesn't mean much, but I truly am sorry." "Sorry doesn't cut it," I spat. "Sorry doesn't erase years of lies. Sorry doesn't give me back the life I thought I had." "I know," he said softly. "I know I've hurt you beyond repair. But Mel, you have to believe me. What we had, it was real." At least for me. I felt tears pricking at my eyes. How can you say that? How can you claim to have loved me while you were sleeping with her, while you were stealing money and lying to my face every day? "It's complicated," Andrew began, but I cut him off. "No, it's not complicated. It's simple. You chose her. You chose money. You chose lies. Over me, over us, over everything we built together." I could hear the pain in his voice as he replied, I never meant for it to go this far. It just spiraled out of control." "And that makes it okay," I demanded. "That excuses everything you've done." "No, of course not," he said. "Nothing excuses what I've done. I know that. I'm just trying to explain." "I don't want your explanations," I interrupted. I want, but I didn't know what I wanted. To turn back time. To erase the last few years and start over. To hurt him as deeply as he'd hurt me. We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. Finally, Andrew spoke again. "What are you going to do now?" I laughed humorlessly. "I have no idea. My whole life was built around you, around us. And now I don't know who I am anymore." "You're strong, Mel," he said softly. "Stronger than you know. You'll get through this." His words, meant to be comforting, only fueled my anger. Don't you dare," I hissed. "Don't you dare try to make this better. You don't get to play the supportive husband anymore. You lost that right when you decided to betray me." I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking with rage and grief. The next morning, I woke with a pounding headache and a sense of shame. What had I been thinking? Calling Andrew like that, showing him how much he'd hurt me, how lost I was without him. As I lay there, wallowing in self-pity, my phone buzzed. Another text from Sarah, the other Sarah. We really need to talk, please. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to shut out everything and everyone connected to this mess. But another part was curious. What could she possibly have to say to me? After a moment's hesitation, I typed out a reply. Fine, where and when? Her response came quickly. The park near your old house. 2 p.m. I glanced at the clock. That gave me a couple of hours to pull myself together, to put on my armor and face the woman who had helped destroy my life. As I showered and dressed, I tried to steel myself for what was to come. But the truth was, I had no idea what to expect. Would Sarah try to apologize, to explain, to threaten me? Whatever her intentions, I knew one thing for certain. I was done being the victim in this story. It was time to take control, to fight back. As I left the motel room, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. She looked harder, older, her eyes filled with a determination I'd never seen before. You can do this, I told my reflection. You're stronger than they know, stronger than you know. With that, I squared my shoulders and headed out to face whatever came next. The old Melissa might have been broken by this betrayal, but this new version, she was just getting started. As I walked towards the park, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, fear, determination. They all battled for dominance. But as I spotted Sarah sitting on a bench, a strange calm settled over me. This was it, the moment I'd take control of my narrative. Hello, Sarah, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She looked up, startled. Melissa, thank you for coming. I sat down beside her, maintaining a careful distance. Let's skip the pleasantries. What do you want? Sarah took a deep breath. I want to explain and to apologize. I laughed, a harsh sound even to my own ears. Apologize? For what? Sleeping with my husband? Helping him steal millions? Or for threatening me when I got too close to the truth? She flinched at my words. All of it. I know it doesn't mean much, but I am truly sorry. You're right, I said coldly. And it doesn't mean much. We sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of children playing in the distance a stark contrast to the tension between us. Finally, Sarah spoke again. I never meant for it to go this far. It started as just a fling. But then my father got involved, and suddenly it was about more than just us. I turned to look at her, really look at her for the first time. She was beautiful, yes, but there was something else. A vulnerability I hadn't expected to see. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Sarah met my gaze. Because I'm done with all of it. The lies, the secrets, the constant fear of being caught. I can't do it anymore. I felt a flicker of something, not sympathy exactly, but perhaps understanding. What are you going to do? I'm going to turn myself in, she said quietly. Tell the authorities everything. About the affair, the fraud, all of it. I stared at her, stunned. This was the last thing I'd expected. What about Andrew, your father? Sarah shook her head. They'll have to face the consequences of their actions, just like I will. As I processed this information, a plan began to form in my mind. Why tell me this? Why not just go to the police? Because, Sarah hesitated, because I thought you deserved to know, and because I hoped maybe you could help me. I raised an eyebrow. Help you? Why would I do that? Because it's the right thing to do, she said simply. And because I think you're the kind of person who wants justice, not revenge. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Was she right? Did I want justice more than I wanted to see them all suffer? I stood up abruptly. I need time to think, Sarah nodded. I understand, but please, don't take too long. Every day this goes on is another day we're all living a lie. As I walked away, my mind was racing. This changed everything. If Sarah was really willing to come clean, to face the consequences of her actions, Over the next few days, I threw myself into research. I talked to lawyers, financial advisors, even a therapist. I weighed every option, considered every possible outcome, and finally, I made my decision. I met Sarah at the police station. She looked terrified but determined. "You came?" she said, relief evident in her voice. I nodded. I did. "Are you ready for this?" "No," she admitted, "but I'm doing it anyway." Together, we walked into the station. As Sarah began to tell her story to the bewildered officers, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. This was it, the beginning of the end. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Andrew and Sarah's father were arrested. The company was thrown into chaos as the extent of the fraud came to light. My phone rang constantly with calls from lawyers, journalists, old friends wanting to know what had happened. Through it all, I held my head high. I gave statements when necessary, attended court hearings with dignity, and slowly began to rebuild my life. One day, as I was leaving the courthouse after another long day of testimony, I ran into Andrew. He looked broken, a shadow of the man I'd married. "Mel," he said, his voice hoarse. I don't know what to say." I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in months, and I realized something. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal, they were still there, but they no longer defined me. "You don't have to say anything, Andrew," I replied. "It's done. We're done, and I'm moving on." As I walked away, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever, but it was acceptance. Acceptance of what had happened and of who I'd become because of it. In the months that followed, I threw myself into building a new life. I started a support group for women who'd been through similar experiences. I went back to school, got my degree in financial forensics, and slowly, I started to rediscover who I was, not as Andrew's wife, not as a victim, but as Melissa, just Melissa. It wasn't easy. There were still days when the pain felt overwhelming, when I questioned every decision I'd ever made, but those days became fewer and farther between. And then, one day, I realized something. I was happy. Not the naive, unquestioning happiness of before, but a deeper, more grounded contentment. I had survived the worst betrayal imaginable, and I had come out stronger on the other side. As for Andrew, last I heard, he was serving his sentence, facing the consequences of his actions. Sarah had received a lighter sentence in exchange for her cooperation and was working to make amends in her own way. And me, I was living, really living, maybe for the first time in my life. I had faced my worst fears, confronted the ugliest truths, and I had survived. More than survived, I had thrived. As I sit here now, looking back on everything that's happened, I can't help but feel a sense of pride, not in what happened to me, but in how I chose to respond to it, in the strength I found within myself, the resilience I never knew I had. My story isn't over. In many ways, it's just beginning. But whatever comes next, I know I can handle it, because I'm not just Andrew's ex-wife, or the woman who uncovered a massive fraud. I'm Melissa, and I'm stronger than I ever knew.